individually though. So you've chosen to join a board, you're on a board, you're thinking, okay, well, what am I really here to do? I understand the cause of the organization, I understand it's something that I believe in and I want to participate in, but what am I really supposed to be doing when I'm here? And sometimes it's really well defined. Some boards have great policies and great understanding of what boards do. Sometimes we think we have that. We haven't really looked at it for a few years. We sort of have this policy manual that kind of sits there. Sometimes we onboard directors really well. So understanding what board members do individually, what their responsibilities are, is really, really important, because there are some liabilities and some downsides that come with perhaps being on a board, or some risks, not necessarily downsides. So each individual director on a board has a fiduciary duty to the organization. It has two main components. Fiduciary is you're taking care of the organization. You're acting in the organization's best interest. So the first is duty of care. To act with the competence and diligence that a reasonably prudent person with similar knowledge and expertise would exercise in comparable circumstances. There's a lot of sort of subjective words in that sentence. So to act with the competence and diligence that a reasonably prudent person would be, well, that's up for grabs at what a reasonably prudent person might be. With similar knowledge and experience, okay, we can probably figure that out. And what comparable situations are, that's hard to know. What it boils down to this, though, is that you need to bring your expertise and your knowledge that you have to the board. So if I have an accountant, I'm not an accountant, but if I were an accountant, and I'm bringing my accounting knowledge to the board, I'm going to be sort of held to a different standard than somebody who's not an accountant. So if you are a carpenter and you come to a board, you're not going to be held to the same standard on accounting matters or financial matters as the accountant. So the competence and diligence of a reasonably prudent person with similar knowledge and experience shifts. It doesn't, however, mean that just because I'm not an accountant, that I don't need to understand financial systems. You can't sort of say that I don't have to understand the financial makings of an organization because we've got an accountant. That's their expertise. It's not up to me. You still have a duty to be informed and to make sure you have enough material so you can weigh in on, even if you're not an expert. Okay, so bring the pieces of you fully to the organization that are part of your expertise and your knowledge. The duty of loyalty. So this is where you're now, how do you make decisions to act in the best interest of the organization? So it's not about your expertise, it's about your commitment. It's about how you engage the organization, how much you say the decisions I make are in the organization's best interest. And this has things that are very simple as coming prepared. Am I coming to a meeting having read the material? It's not just I'm sitting on the board meeting, whipping through the reports, reading the financial statements as the meeting starts. I'm coming prepared to actually make decisions and to enter into a conversation or discussion about that. Have I declared any conflicts of interest? Are there things that have arisen in the course of our duty of being a board that, probably I might have a bit of a conflict here. We're talking about maybe doing an event and, somebody in my family owns the event space. It doesn't necessarily mean that I can't be involved in that discussion. Sometimes it's maybe as simple as declaring the conflict. Sometimes it's abstaining from discussion and decision-making on that. But making sure that both in what you do in terms of making best choices for the organization and how you avoid having even the appearance of being in conflict, don't take away from that. So lots of pieces on duty of care. There's things that, even having a board member who is a big supporter of the CEO. Absolutely, be supportive of your staff, but there needs to be a board support, not that you've got one sort of favorite board member who keeps the CEO in power. That's not duty of loyalty to the organization. That's sort of duty of loyalty to a CEO, which is not quite the same thing. So two big things: duty of care, duty of loyalty, bringing the best self, bringing your expertise, and doing things that are in the organization's best interest. In theory, really good. Sometimes, I think in most cases, most times these aren't that hard to put into reality. But there's always situations that arise. You think, okay, duty of loyalty, what is in the organization's best interest? And that's where it goes back to the board having to make decisions, not an individual. So within fiduciary duty, there's some lanes you work within. To say I'm here for the best interest of the organization, fantastic, that's good to know. But how do I know kind of those broad lanes? Like, how do I know what I can and cannot do? And part of our work at IntegralOrg, we do work in three really big areas. One is boards. We work education like this, but we also do a lot of work one-on-one with boards, helping them do what they do better. We have a legal department to our organization. We're an approved legal services providers. So we act like a law firm. And we also do strategy and planning. But when you look at the legal side of things, there are some broad laneways that have been established. When I'm talking today, I'm largely talking about Alberta nonprofits. I know we have folks from all over the world. I guess we're coming out global entity. Fantastic. I'm talking largely Alberta nonprofits and Alberta legislation. Some of the resources are really applicable in Canada, but beyond that, you probably need to do some of your own work and say, okay, how does this really work? So in Alberta, it works this way. You have an act. We have legislative acts that say this allows you to be a nonprofit. Right now, two big ones in Alberta, the Societies Act, that's about 3/4 perhaps of all the nonprofits incorporated in Alberta are the Societies Act. Right now, there's probably somewhere around 30,000 nonprofits in this province. There's a lot of them. You have a ton of nonprofits for some reason, but 3/4 of those are societies. Pretty standard, pretty basic form of incorporation. We also have nonprofit companies. You can be a part of the Companies Act. IntegralOrg is a nonprofit company because we have a commercial aspect to what we do in our work. So if you're carrying on a commercial activity, the Companies Act is a much better option for that kind of things. But those legislations sort of set the parameters of what you can do. What are the requirements of the Act? You don't necessarily need to go read the Act. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless you really want to. But that sets some of the parameters, and some of the materials out there, certainly in the Alberta government website, their draft bylaws perhaps will incorporate the Act and get it down to that next level are the objects, why you were formed. This tells you what you're to do. The Act sets the big rules and then say, okay, you can do certain things. To be a nonprofit, you have certain objects or articles perhaps that say, this is what we're about. These are the changes we want to make in the world. If you become a charity, that becomes far more rigid. So being a charity, being a corporation or nonprofit is an incorporation status, like being a business. Getting charitable registration, being a charity, is a tax status granted by CRA. And once you have that, under some of the purposes that the CRA says are beneficial to society, you can only do things that are within your charitable purposes. So if you are a food bank, perhaps, and that's part of your charitable mandate, and you decide, yeah, we want to go and run a IT business as a little side social enterprise, probably not a part of your charitable purposes. So the things you can do go from the Act to your objects, what you're incorporated to do, down to the next level is your bylaws. And this is how you'll be governed. So every nonprofit will have bylaws. They do need to be updated and reviewed every now and then just to make sure that they're up to date. And as the acts change, and the Companies Act did just change. So if you have that kind of bylaw, you probably need to update those. But this sort of tells you how you be governed. Who can be a member? How members are appointed, or how they're, I get rid of members. Where how you hold meetings. Some of those things that are kind of standard nonprofit, they seem to be in the background. That comes from your bylaws. And policies are what you'll do. This is where I think governance policies are the big thing. You tend to have two sets of policies in a nonprofit. Governance policies telling us how the board will governance work, how we'll understand what the board's going to do, and they'll have operational policies that understand how the operations side. So IntegralOrg, our board has a pretty extensive governance manual that lays out the roles of board members, the different officers perhaps are in there. And then we have, things that I have as an operational CEO saying, here's what myself and the staff and my consulting group will do in terms of how we will operate. And then procedures, how we're going to carry those out, how we're going to do these things. So it's a bit of a funnel saying there are some laneways there. It's going to sort of narrow you down. So you can't just do whatever you want. Some of these things can be changed. You can change policies fairly easily. Objects and bylaws less easily, but you can change them. The legislation probably is what it is. You're not going to do much about that, which is probably good.